Welcome back, everyone. Grab a seat and enjoy the vibe for another drawing session. For today's video, I've decided to create a character made of clouds. Well, actually two. The first one is the one you're seeing right now, which I used for the thumbnail, and the second one is really just an excuse to make a video. Without further ado, I'll leave you with the process from the very beginning. Like any good creative process, we are starting this character design with a cloud storming session. I know exactly what I am looking for. A character made of clouds, with that colorful, futuristic Guardians of the Galaxy vibe, but in the sky, wearing a stylized suit with superhero vibes. Since the character is a cloud, and clouds do not have a defined shape, I apply that same philosophy to the character's shape, trying different ways to build its body. I also think adding wings could be a good choice to give it a way to move through the sky. Angel wings, but made from clouds, are, even at this early stage, one of the elements I am most drawn to, although not all concepts in this phase will feature them. I want the character to be radiant as well, to have elements that emit their own light, as if it were the sun or the stars in the sky, or a lightning bolt on a stormy night. To make this fit well with the idea of creating a suit that feels heroic, colorful, and with a futuristic touch, I can add neons to the suit, like beams of light coming out of it, which is pretty much what I am trying to represent with those rounded lines around the design. Something like that could look cool, like a winged warrior with golden medieval armor wrapping around its cloud body. Maybe drawing it in a way that the torso resembles a lava lamp. Still, that is a bit too much. Experimenting is fine, but this strays too far from the idea I want to pursue in the first place, so it is going to be discarded. This is a problem that the next sketch also suffers from. Cool concept, but not fit for what I am looking to do in today's video. And with the canvas filled with small ideas, it's time to decide what kind of character I want to make. These two designs here fit quite well with the concept I'm aiming for, but I want to go in a different direction with the suit, something like an aviator jacket, more or less like this. With those choices locked in, the brainstorming phase, the cloud storming phase is officially over. It is time to start building this cloud guy. So to start the definitive design in the most convenient way, I am drawing the character in a static pose, completely from the front. Right now, my ideas are still too vague and general. I know a long road of testing and going in circles around this concept awaits me, so drawing it this way is much simpler. Also, to speed up the process even more, I am drawing with symmetry. That way, I only have to do one half of the character, a trick that saves a ton of time. I start by adding all the fundamental elements I want present in the final design, just to see how they actually combine with each other. For the outfit, I want it to be something light, mainly a jacket, gloves, and not much else. I want to leave a large part of the body exposed to have free space to add shapes that bring out that fluffy cloud texture. To work on the body more comfortably, I separated it into its own layerish layer and hid the rest of the elements. That gave me a much clearer view of the shape itself, which turned out to be more challenging to design than I expected. In theory, it is something that should not be too complicated. One of my ideas was to go with rounded, minimalist shapes, kind of like the character from Big Hero 6. At the same time, I did not want to stray too far from human proportions. I want him to feel like a human made of cloud material, not an amorphous monster, which is a result I actually got on more than one try. Right here, I decided to push the proportions a bit and make the torso wider. It makes sense as clouds can be really bulky, just like this body. I am testing the idea of covering the whole body in circular shapes, trying to find a middle ground between a human form and clouds. However, this moves too far from the human silhouette. It already looks like he is wearing a suit, so putting the actual outfit on top looks weird, like he has 2 layers of clothing on. It is a strange effect that lacks cohesion. Plus, at this point, he almost looks like a villain instead of the hero of the movie. In the end, after going in circles a lot, I stuck with this body type, where clouds seem to come out of the character's own body, keeping a correct anatomy, but breaking the symmetry with wavy shapes. Before starting this project, when it was barely an idea in my head, I planned on doing something much crazier to represent a character made of clouds, with more exaggerated shapes and proportions. In the end, the chosen option works well, but I wouldn't say it stands out for being too original. I tried to make something more unique, but it simply didn't work. I just didn't see a way. I guess there were low clouds or something, so visibility on that way was limited.
I suppose I should apologize for this attempt at a joke, but I didn't see any other way to make it funnier. I guess there were too many little clouds. Okay, sorry about that.
Being self-critical. One of the weakest points I see in the design is that both the wings and the body are supposed to be built from clouds, but they both use a different cloud style. It is not something that worries me too much, since I am not trying to make a super serious character design. If anything, I would rather embrace a bit of chaos and fun, and overall, I think this character fits the tone I am aiming for quite well. Now it is time to work on the final composition. First, I set up some guides to fix the perspective. Since this character can fly, I want him positioned above the viewer. I am going to use a low camera angle, forcing the viewer to look right up at him. For the pose, I want something dynamic and powerful. To achieve this, I used some reference images, mostly from comic books, featuring different heroes in poses that fit the character I am creating. I do not want to make a one-to-one copy of any reference image though, so I build a new pose. Even so, I rely heavily on the references, since they help me place the muscles correctly, maintaining a certain level of anatomical accuracy in the character. However, influenced by these references, I ended up discarding an element I was quite interested in exploring, making the character sturdier, with a bit of a belly. It made conceptual sense because clouds are usually bulky too. Nevertheless, choosing a sleeker figure helps improve the visibility of the composition in this specific case, as there is more space available between the different parts of the body, allowing certain elements like the wings to be better appreciated. Another point in favor of using this thinner build is that it makes it easier to use a dynamic, forced pose, where the body bends in an almost impossible way to convey the idea that his body is made of a flexible, lightweight material. The torso faces one side of the canvas, while the face and legs point to the opposite side, with a very pronounced hip twist. In essence, it is 2 different poses coexisting in the same body. One of the details I liked least about the character was the disconnection between the different styles used to represent cloud details on the wings and the body for no good reason. However, by adding a few lines as details, the concept of the wings suddenly takes on a new meaning. Now they are made of feathers, like an ordinary wing, but arranged in such a way that the feathers mimic small whirlpools and wind trails. They are no longer wings made of clouds, but wings made of feathers that pretend to be made of clouds. This explains why the cloud details on the wings look different from the rest of the body, an explanation that works for me, at least. I like that the helmet levitates over the head without being attached to anything, and the visor with a cloud silhouette strikes me as a detail somewhere between absurd and brilliant that gives it a lot of personality. Plus, leaving the top part open allows me to release a smoke trail like a punk crest, which fits him really well. This helmet should have some fancy ability. For example, the capacity to see through clouds. It makes some sense because this guy moves around in the sky where there are plenty of clouds. Plus, his own body produces them, so he could cloud his own vision. In fact, he can not only see through clouds, but he can cloud through seeing. That is, he has cloud vision. Plus, if he looks at you too hard, he can project clouds onto your inner self, causing depression. And he can not only cloud your emotions, but he can also cloud your judgment, impacting your decision-making. Cloudly a powerful combo. I want the cloud details on the body to feel dynamic and break up the figure wherever they appear. To achieve this, I make them long and extended, ensuring they stand out while trying not to obscure important details. Fortunately, since it is essentially smoke, I can shape it as I please, so avoiding that problem is pretty straightforward. Once the sketch has enough detail, it is time to add some color. I want to try something a little different and keep the character mostly monochromatic, using yellow as the foundation for the entire palette. From this, I will make variations of luminosity and saturation to build the different tones that I will use in the composition. The goal is for the character to feel radiant, almost like a divine being made of light. Since this character is essentially an angel, I am going to make their gender ambiguous, making it difficult to determine whether it is a man or a woman, given that, at least in the Christian religion, these beings have no gender. This is an outcome I am going to try to achieve to the best of my ability. I do not think I can hit a perfect spot right in the center of the spectrum, but achieving this effect to some degree will satisfy me. And after these final highlights, the sketch is finished. It ended up moving quite far from the initial concept, but when changing to a more dynamic pose, certain elements do not translate as well. Besides, I feel the implemented changes are for the better, and I like how it looks now much more compared to the original idea.
I'm quite proud of the work I've done so far, if I do say so myself.
And now it is time to clean up the sketch. The better the sketch is, the less effort it takes to translate those initial lines into the final line art. And here, the previous drawing is polished enough to make the process quick and smooth. Smooth like a cloud. With the main outlines ready, I switch to a thinner brush to define the minor details, like muscle definition, things that I do not want to stand out as much as the figure's silhouette, but whose inclusion is important. With the line work done, it is time to add the color. I am staying true to the idea of using yellow as the main color, which complicates the workflow since I give up using different hues for contrast. Even so, this artistic decision offers plenty of possibilities. By desaturating the yellow and darkening it a little, I achieve more muted ochre tones that fit the wings very well, giving them a golden finish. However, the base tone is still yellow, even if it might not be so obvious at first glance. This is also a great moment to point out how useful and convenient smoke trails are, specifically the one coming out of one of the thighs, which extremely opportunely hides a certain compromised area. Due to the very particular choice of outfit, it leaves areas exposed that would normally be covered. The character shares that curious Donald Duck style of wearing practically just a jacket, which is questionable to say the least when it comes to a human figure, a situation saved thanks to this smoke trail.
Shaped wings, clouds that precede the rain, the excessive use of yellow, and the inexplicable lack of pants, that combination feels dangerously close to a pretty easy joke. And I am not sure I like where that leads.
And with this final touch on the floating fabric, the coloring is finished. For now, the result is satisfactory, and I am happy with the direction this project is taking. It's time to build the lighting for the scene. The main light source will simulate the position of the sun, high up on the canvas, coming down at an angle and projecting the shadows toward the opposite side. There's nothing particularly fancy about it, it's just there to get the job done. To increase the contrast between the lit and shadowed areas, I'm going to give these zones different tones, which will add a slightly more unique and colorful touch. For the shadows, I'll use a somewhat pinkish tone, and for the light areas, a warm yellow. These color tones are quite subtle, acting like a veil that tints the character's base color. With this choice of lighting colors, I'm looking to create an atmosphere reminiscent of a sunset. While the lighting process continues, I'd like to talk about one particular part of the suit, the gloves. It wasn't entirely intentional, but they kind of look like lamps. The only difference is that instead of a light bulb, you just have an entire arm filling that space. This opens up a whole new world of possibilities when it comes to giving fancy abilities to the suit. A light bulb produces light, so naturally the arm should do the same. More importantly, it should also be able to project a beam of light directly from itself. Admittedly, that's still pretty basic. Shooting lasers hardly sounds groundbreaking. I think the concept improves considerably if the laser contains rainbows, like lots of them, just tiny rainbows packed together into a single beam. At the very least, it would make for a nice light show. And as a completely unrelated side effect, each tiny rainbow would have enough energy concentrated along its razor-thin edge to cleanly split small animals in half, as though they had been struck by an extremely colorful axe.
But don't worry, the physical damage is just an afterthought. Any little bird caught in a beam would face such an overwhelming spectacle of light and color that its mind would just collapse. Perishing, not from any physical wound, but from witnessing something so beautiful that any future life experience would lack meaning.
Certain parts of the suit, like the arches on the shoulders and gloves, will emit their own light. Since I want the character to be closely associated with light, it's important that this effect is present. I need to build the scene with these elements in mind, tinting the closest areas with a warm yellow and adding a glow effect around each source. It's time to add some texture to the drawing. Up until now, I've been working with flat colors to better visualize how the composition is developing and how the different elements interact with one another. Now that that stage is complete, it's time to introduce a bit more visual richness. This part is actually quite simple. It mostly consists of adding variation to the shapes that are already defined, without worrying too much about precision. I'll start with the shadow layer, gradually fading it as it approaches the brighter areas. These are subtle changes, but they do a great deal to break up large blocks of flat color. During this process, there will be moments when it feels like I'm redoing certain elements with a different brush, almost as if I'm erasing previous work. In reality, however, I'm working with a mask applied to that layer. This allows me to separate the shapes of the different elements in the composition from the texture applied to them, so I can edit each one independently. It also lets me test and experiment with different brushes and textures without worrying about ruining what I've already done. For the highlights, I'm going to use a brush that creates all these little tiny dots, applying it quite heavily so that they remain visible and stand out. My goal is to develop a slightly more distinctive style through the use of noise in certain areas. But I don't want to apply this finish across the entire drawing, as too much visual clarity would be lost, at least for my taste. That's why I've avoided using it so far in the shadows and on certain elements, such as the transparent sections of the suit, where I preferred a smoother brush. I want to increase the luminosity in this part of the wings as it sits closer to the main light source, to emphasize the fall-off effect of the glow as it moves away from the focal point. Additionally, since this glow layer is where I'll apply the noise texture, I want to expand it slightly so the grain can be better appreciated, as this particular finish doesn't work as well in smaller areas. Right now I'm coloring the lines so they integrate better into the composition, making sure they don't stand out too much, but also don't get lost in the piece. That's why I'm applying different tones to the line work. And speaking of work, this just reminded me that I have to go to mine tomorrow. 8 whole hours. That's a perfectly normal amount of time apparently, but I'd honestly rather drown. It's kind of annoying needing money to buy stuff. I like having stuff, so I feel like I'm facing an impossible problem. But getting back to the drawing, as a final step before working on the background, I add a secondary tone over the wings to create a subtle gradient, since these areas were looking excessively flat. It's a simple formula, but it gets the job done. You know what's the worst part? Not only do I have to go to my job tomorrow, but the day after that, and the day after the day after that. Since it's Monday as I'm editing this, the week has just begun. Eventually, Friday will arrive, followed by the weekend, but I don't think it's enough. It's more like a way to delay the inevitable, since I'll have to work next Monday anyway. I guess I should be grateful to at least have a job, but man, it's hard to be. Anyway, sorry about that. With those final touches in place, we're ready to move on to the next phase. Let's move on to the background. This time, I'm going to do something a little different. I start by placing clouds over a solid background to create a simple sky. I'm not aiming for anything too complex or realistic, just a backdrop that supports the main figure without drawing too much attention away from it. I've experimented with different cloud arrangements. One idea I tried was adding a white diagonal line across the image, using the same texture as the clouds to resemble an airplane contrail. However, Because of its placement, it can also look like a cloud-like laser beam shooting from the character's eyes. In the end, I don't think the idea quite works, so I'll be leaving it out. To make the character stand out a bit more against the background, I placed a rectangle behind him where his shadow will be cast. To help integrate this shape into the composition, I used the same translucent material found in some elements of the suit. I decided to discard the blue color of the background and replace it with tones that match the colors used in the character's lighting. This helps make it feel as though he truly belongs within the scene, even though I really liked the contrast between the blue background and the character's yellow tones. In the end, I settled on this cloud arrangement, which creates a stronger sense of depth as the clouds gradually decrease in size toward the horizon. I also adjusted their tilt to better match the lighting direction and background gradient. And with all the background clouds finally in place, let's see what the hell I just did. The Guardian of the Sky. The Sovereign of the Clouds. The Bearer of Light. Lift your eyes to contemplate and appreciate the magnificent, blinding majesty of His radiant presence. For above all else, above all things, He looks absolutely divine and fabulous. Well, I hope you enjoyed this rather excessive introduction. Regarding the drawing, I think I have reached a new height with this one.
When I say I have reached new heights, I do not mean it in a pretentious way. Quite literally, the character is flying and floating among the clouds.
Additionally, I made a second variation, changing the lighting tone in the background to more bluish style tones. I slightly prefer this version. The contrast increases the difference between the main figure and the background a bit more. But even though the result is good, I feel like something is missing, especially in the color scheme. Why use so much yellow? If the explanation is the connection to light, that is fine, but pure light is white, which is the combination of the entire visible spectrum, and yellow is just a secondary derivative of mixing two light tones. Still, using just white tones does not completely convince me either. However, I think I have found a good solution. Let me introduce you to Team RGB. Each one is the bearer of a primary color. By combining these three, they can produce an absolute white light. But this also opens the doors to a new world of possibilities, since besides white, they can generate other tones. Check this out. For when things get out of hand, a solid support squad. From here on out, building a complete rainbow is quite simple, and I would not forgive myself if I let this opportunity pass. What a tremendous rainbow squad. Now the composition is finally complete. All it needed was a little more color. And with this bluish version, I say goodbye, because Well, that has been all for this video. Huge thanks for watching, and I will see you in the next one.
This bluish version is fine, but it's missing something. Oh boy, now we're talking. Why limit yourself to a bunch of colors when you can just have them all?